As we all know, the demographics and corresponding workforce demands in every country in Africa has shifted dramatically in the last 50 years. Upon gaining independence in the 1960s, African economies were heavily dependent on commodities derived from natural resources. The great majority of jobs were low-skilled and concentrated in the extractive industries. Secondary and higher education was primarily concerned with training individuals to run governments and civil service jobs, creating an African middle class, but not generally contributing to the knowledge-based economy. Fast forward half a century or so to today, we are undergoing a fourth industrial revolution characterized by a job market that demands technical training. The World Economic Forum report on the future of jobs projects that 65% of children who are born today will eventually be in jobs that do not exist today. It moreover foresees a major disruption in global labor markets that impact millions of people who will shift from white-collar to bureaucratic jobs, from administrative jobs to computer, technical, architectural, and engineering-related fields. The African Academy of Sciences, where I am associated, is a Pan-African trans-scientific organization based in Nairobi. We are tightly aligned with the AU's STISA 24. The vision is an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven and managed by its citizens and representing a dynamic force in the international arena through its goal to accelerate the transition of Africa to a knowledge-based, innovation-led economy. As reflected in STISA 2024, the AS works on behalf of African well-being and is dependent upon the improvement of status of STI in terms of human capital, technical competence, infrastructure, and enabling environment, fostering innovation, and encouraging an entrepreneurial attitude. The focus of the Academy is to develop world-class science infrastructure in Africa that is highly coordinated and powered by a level of investment that is proportional to our economic and human dependence on research and innovation. We've set our priorities and implemented our flagship programs accordingly, and they're all supported by efficient management, which is essential to scaffolding strong programs. These include Deltas Africa, H3 Africa, Grand Challenges Africa, and the Circle Fellowship, which together help drive the establishment of first-class science in Africa. This level of investment in the interest of African economic and human well-being will only be sustainable if African R&D is led by Africans in Africa with priorities set by Africa and for Africa. The AAS, through its programmatic arm known as the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, AISA, has been contributing to this effort by its investment in research excellence across the continent. You learned in the keynote remarks from the President's yesterday that she stepped up to lead the Coalition for African Research and Innovation, known as CARI. Through AISA, AAS will run CARI at least in its initial years. This is a reflection of our belief that the health and well-being of people on the continent depends on our ability to create a broad, comprehensive infrastructure in Africa that rivals the science output of any continent in the world. As the President said yesterday, CARI intends to do no less than trigger a movement that will ultimately result in large-scale and collaborative investment in R&D in Africa, making science an integral part of public discourse on the continent. I acknowledge the optimism and ambition of this vision. In fact, the nations of the AU have already pledged 1% of GDP to invest in R&D, yet no country has yet reached this goal. In fact, only 1.3% of global R&D is spent in Africa. The modesty of this investment is at once a cause and effect of Africa's vulnerable economies. For example, the proportion of scientific researchers of the population in Africa is about 3.5% of the proportion of scientific researchers of the population of the US. The global average of students pursuing graduate study in Africa is threefold lower than it is globally. And Africa's investment in science infrastructure is also comparatively low. Thus, we have a negative feedback loop. Without the training and infrastructure for large-scale science education and research, we can't grow and attract and keep our scientific talent. And without our scientific talent, we can't justify the investment in our R&D infrastructure. Yet those behind Kerry see it as not just possible to achieve this ambition, but essential to the future of the continent. Kerry will do this by catalyzing public and private investment, coordinating research effort, and demanding excellence. It will also work to ensure that there is talent, equipment, and buildings for the entire spectrum of research, from basic unapplied scientific research through translational development to application. If we can achieve this, Africa will rival the world in scientific research. Instead of losing our best students and early career researchers to seeking advanced training and opportunities elsewhere in the world, we can become a net host of scientific talent if we make the right investments in education, training, infrastructure, and careers in science and technology. For the good of our economy, as well as of our culture and our well-being, we must prioritize innovation in education so that more of our talented youth will stay in Africa for training. Moreover, if we do this, the African diaspora will come back, driven not by family needs or duty or sentiment or guilt, but because they will find an environment where they can perform their research and develop their careers as productively here in Africa as they can anywhere in the world. At the same time, we must continue to keep an eye and fight for inclusion, not just globally, but within the continent. At first blush, one might conclude the challenge of gender inclusion that's been mentioned several times in these days is resolved. As you've seen, women make up the majority of those enrolled in university in no fewer than 100 countries in the world. Yet if one looks more deeply at the numbers, sectoral and cultural practices tell another story. According to the same WEF report, female talent remains one of the most underutilized business resources in the world, either squandered through lack of progression or untapped at the outset. Although women are, on average, more educated than men globally and now participate more fully in professional and technical occupations than they did in 2006, their chances to rise to positions of leadership are only 28% of their male counterparts. That's according to the WEF report. In fact, in industry worldwide today, women make up on average 33% of junior level staff. They fall to 24% of mid-level staff, descend to 15% of senior level staff, and are just 9% of CEOs. In order to achieve the goals that we're all striving for, the implementation of true gender equality, not just on the input side, must be addressed. Africa is moving beyond a focus on the survival of its people to the focus on the full human and economic empowerment and realization of its people. This means that it's utterly dependent upon a robust economy based on science and innovation, and welcoming the inclusion of talent from all over the world and any gender who sees the opportunity to contribute to the STI-driven Africa of the future. Thank you.